to factoring polynomials with a visual guide. This is already part 3 of a series of videos to help students understand factoring polynomials completely. In this part of the tutorial series, we will be discussing factoring trinomials, which are what we call quadratic-like. Now, but before we continue, these are important concepts you might want to recall. So number 1, it's factoring quadratic trinomials with leading coefficient 1. This is actually part 2 of the series. Another is multiplying binomials using the FOIL method. Now, if you need to review these topics, or you are confident enough to skip to other parts of this video, click the links in the description below. But don't worry, we'll still try to explain some previous topics naman as we go along. Also, lahat ng notes ng examples natin dito sa lecture will be available for download later para pwede nyong i-print for review. Now, let us try to recall our factoring polynomials, the visual guide. Now, the very first thing we should do is step 1, get the greatest common monomial factor. So, this is actually part 1 of our tutorial series. Now, step 2 is use other techniques of factoring because after getting the GCMF, we are left with either a trinomial, a binomial, or 4 or more terms. So, today, we are continuing discussing trinomials. Actually, number 1 here, trinomials with leading coefficient equal to 1, tapos na natin, that's part 2 of the tutorial series. Today, we are discussing quadratic-like trinomials. Medyo sa segue tayo, we are currently here sa quadratic-like trinomials. Skip muna natin sandali itong 2 and 3 just to discuss quadratic-like trinomials. Before anything else, let's try to recall quadratic expressions. This is actually part 2 of our tutorial series. Now, particularly, let's discuss the 2 characteristics of quadratic expressions that we're trying to factor. First, from the name itself, it's quadratic. The highest degree here, as you can see, is equal to 2. Now, second decreasing degree of terms. Meaning, looking at our terms here, the degree of this is 2. And of course, we know the degree of this is 1, although you don't have to write 1. And then finally, C is a constant. It has no variable. The degree is 0. So, decreasing degree to 1, 0. Now, ang gagawin natin in this tutorial is what if we're given ganito ng itsura ng trinomial? Of course, this is still quadratic. Ang problema, what if we are given to the 4th power like this one or something more complicated than this one? So this is our topic for today. Let's look at this first example. Let's say we're given this trinomial a² plus 7ab plus 12b squared. Now, this is a trinomial that has 2 variables, a and b. Now, anong gagawin natin kapag may 2 variables na? Now, let's try to look at this one by checking our observation list here. First, is it still quadratic? Looking at the first term, it's a squared. So, the exponent is 2. The degree of this is equal to 2. This is still quadratic. How about 7ab? We have 2 variables this time. A has an exponent 1. B has an exponent 1. So, adding these 2, the degree of this second term is 2. Still quadratic. 12b squared, exponent is 2. Therefore, still quadratic. So, in our checklist, yep, this trinomial is still quadratic. Now, second, does it have a decreasing degree? Notice, this is 2, 2, and 2. Hindi na decreasing ang degree natin. It's actually constant all throughout. It's 2. However, we can look at variable a only. Now, if you look at variable a squared, the degree here is 2. A to the 1, the degree here is 1. There's no variable a here. Therefore, the degree is 0. So, we can actually say it has a decreasing degree, well, at least for variable a. Now, let's look at the second variable kasi dalawang variable natin. Here, walang b. So, the degree is equal to 0. Next, here, my b to the 1, therefore, degree is 1. Here, b squared, therefore, the degree is 2. So, looking at our second observation here, while a has a decreasing order of degree, our next variable, second variable b, it has actually an increasing degree. Okay. Now, last, ang gagawin natin is check natin, is the leading coefficient 1? Of course, we need to check kung kamukha niya yung previous topic natin, factoring trinomials with leading coefficient 1. In this case, the numerical coefficient of our first term is 1. Therefore, the leading coefficient is equal to 1. So, how do we factor then this trinomial? Now, ang gagawin natin is we treat this na parang wala kang second variable b. So, pag parang wala kang second variable b, para ka lang may a squared plus 7a plus 12. Now, does that look familiar? Yes, kamukha lang siya nung previous topic natin. We have a trinomial with leading coefficient 1. How do we do that again? How do we factor it? Look at the constant here, 12. What we want to do is find the factors of 12 factor pairs with sum equal to 7. So, ilista muna natin yung mga factor pairs ng 12. So, let me write it here. First, we have 1 and 12. They multiply to 12. Immediately consider its opposite kaagad. So, we have negative 1 and negative 12. Pwede rin. Next, we know that 2 is a factor. Therefore, 2 times 6. So, factors of 12. Consider its opposite, negative 2 and negative 6. We know, of course, that 12 is divisible by 3. So, 3 times 4 is 12. Consider its opposite, negative 3 and negative 4. Meron pa ba? 1, 2, 3, 4. Nailista na natin yung 4 doon, so wag mo nang ulitin. So, we have finally listed all factor pairs of 12. Now, ang gagawin natin is, we look at these factors and look for those factors or the factor that sum up to 7. So, kailangan ang sum ng factors natin is equal to 7. So, 1 plus 12 is 13. Negative 1 minus 12 is negative 13. Again, no, not equal to 7. 2 plus 6 is 8. No. Negative 2 minus 6 is negative 8, which is not equal to 7. Hindi pa rin. Now, 3 plus 4 is equal to 7. Therefore, these are the factor pairs we need. So, normally, kapag walang variable b, ito na dapat ang sagot. We have a plus 3 and then times a plus 4. Now, ang gagawin lang natin this time, since we have a second variable b, you simply append or idadagdag nyo lang sa second term yung b. Yan na yung sagot. So, this is our answer. Now, teka, you might say, sigurado ka, sir? Of course, the last step is to always check your answer. How do we check your answer again? It's by using the FOIL method, meaning multiply the first, outer, inner, and last, just to make sure. So let's try and do that. First terms, a times a is a squared. Plus outer, we have a times 4b, we have 4ab. Plus inner, 3b times a is 3ab. Plus last terms, 3b times 4b is 12b squared. Now, just like previous na mga sinosolve natin, outer and inner usually can be combined. In this case, they're like terms, they can be combined. So we have a squared plus 4ab plus 3ab is 7ab. And last, copy 12b squared, which is just equal to our problem here. So sigurado tayo na that's the answer. Now, one thing very important that I would like to reiterate is the key here is the middle literal coefficient. Anong ibig sabihin yan? Now, every time that you're given two variables, the only way or the only time that you can do our technique here, yung idadagdag mo lang yung b sa second term, is looking at the literal coefficient of the middle term. So, check natin. Ano bang literal coefficient ng middle term? It's AB. So, ang gagawin mo is, looking at the first, when you square A, it's A squared. Is it equal to our first term, the literal coefficient of the first term? In this case, it's yes. Now next, let's look at the variable b. If we square b here, it's b squared. Is it equal to the literal coefficient of the third term? The answer is yes. So if the answer is yes, you will always or you can always use our technique here. Kakabit mo lang yung b sa dulo. Let's have these exercises. You can pause this video now and work on them. Kaya yan. Go! Here are the answers and solutions so you can check. Okay, let's try to solve this more challenging trinomial this time. Well, it's still a trinomial, however, if we'll observe, this is not quadratic anymore. Oh, mahirap na. Nako, how do we do this? How about decreasing degree? Yes, it's still in decreasing degree of order. This is c to the fourth, this is c squared, and then this is c to the 0. So 0 degree, decreasing order still. And last one, is the leading coefficient equal to 1? Yes, it is. The leading coefficient is equal to 1. Therefore, we can factor like what we did nung previous na topic natin. But ang problema lang natin dito is, hindi nga siya quadratic. So, ang pwede natin gawin is, ang key is look at the middle literal coefficient. So, the middle literal coefficient is c squared. Ang gagawin natin is, let's try to rewrite everything in terms of c squared. Meaning, let's rewrite that it's 8 quantity c squared. Of course, we know they're the same. Now, may I ask you, is c to the fourth equal to c squared raised to the second power? Yes, it is. C squared to the second is c to the fourth. So, ito actually equal din dun. Ito equal din dun. Plus 12. Okay, now, why did we do that? We'll know in a while. Basta take note, what we did is we wrote everything in terms of our middle literal coefficient, which is the key. Now, why did we do that? The reason is, we can let c squared, actually here, c squared, be equal to a certain variable. Kunwari, the variable is x. Meaning, we can replace our c squareds here with the variable x. Let's try and do that. C squared can be written as x. Kasi nga, nag-let c squared tayo equal to x. Pero c squared pa lang yan. C squared squared meaning x squared. Do you get what I mean? Ulit, replace c squared with x. Tapos, you square it. Plus, let me copy 8. Again, we can see c squared here, which we can replace ulit with the variable x. So, pinalitan natin yung c squared with x. Plus, copy 12. Now, anong nangyari? What we did was convert this to something very familiar. It's now quadratic. It's something that's very familiar, which is factorable for us. So it's now x squared plus 8x plus 12. We now have a quadratic trinomial. So kaya pala sinabi na quadratic-like trinomial, because this, hindi man quadratic, can be rewritten as a quadratic trinomial. Kaya it's quadratic-like. So, how do we solve or factor this again? Recall, the leading coefficient is 1. Therefore, let's look first at the factor pairs of 12. So, let's try and do that. Factor pairs of 12. We have 1 and 12. We have negative 1 and negative 12. And then 2 and 6, negative 2 and negative 6. We have 3, 4, negative 3, and negative 4. Look for factor pairs with sum equal to 8. Now, just by observation, kailangan bilisan natin. We know that 2 plus 6 is 8. Therefore, this is the correct factor pair. Therefore, if we try to factor this one, it will be equal to the quantity x, use 2 here and 6, plus 2, and then x plus 6. So these are the factors of this one. However, gawa-gawa lang natin yung x na yan. There's really no such thing as x. Therefore, let's try and revert back to the original. Replace x with c squared. So doing that, we now replace x with c squared. C squared, that is x, plus 2. Times, what is x again? It's c squared plus 6. Therefore, these are now the factors of our original trinomial. Now, sige, subukan nating i-check just to be sure. Sigurado ka, sir, ganyan ang sagot. Let's check. How do we check again? By using the FOIL method. Okay, let's try. So, first terms, c squared times c squared is c to the 4th. Plus, outer terms, c squared times 6 is 6c squared. Plus, inner terms, 2 times c squared is 2c squared. Plus, last terms, 2 times 6 is 12. Again, like other previous problems, we can add outer and inner here. We have c to the 4th. They are like terms. 6c squared plus 2c squared is 8c squared plus 12, which is equal to our original trinomial. So that's how you answer just in case you're given something like this. The key is the middle literal coefficient. Replace that with a variable so that it would look like a quadratic trinomial before you can do our techniques of factoring. Okay, what if we're given the last example here? We are asked to factor a plus 1, that quantity squared, plus 8 times a plus 1 quantity, plus 7. Now, just like in the previous examples, the key is the middle literal coefficient. In this case, the literal coefficient is not really a monomial. It's actually a binomial, a plus 1. So, our aim is to write everything in terms of a certain variable na ipapalit natin sa binomial a plus 1. Now, what we can do is just like again in the previous example, what if we let this binomial a plus 1 be equal to another variable? Kunwari sabihin nating m yan. So replace a1 with m, replace a1 with m. Therefore, doing that, a plus 1 is equal to m. Then a plus 1 squared, therefore, is m squared. Plus the middle coefficient, the middle term, 8 times a plus 1. But a plus 1, take note, is equal to m. And then finally, copy 7. Okay, now does this look familiar now? Yes, it is. Quadratic na siya. And more importantly, quadratic din naman yung dati, pero ito kasi, our variable or middle literal coefficient is a monomial na, not a binomial. So we solve like ordinary solving. The leading coefficient is 1. We can use our technique. Now, what are the factors of 7 with sum equal to 8? Let's write all factors of 7. We have 1 and 7 and negative 1 and negative 7. Of course, it's very obvious. We use 1 and 7 because its sum, it's equal to 8. Therefore, ang gagawin natin is, we solve this like what we have been doing. Copy the variable m and then use 1 and 7. So plus 1 and then m plus 7. So these are the factors of this. However, gawa-gawa lang natin yung m. There is really no such thing as m. So let's revert back to the original a plus 1. What we do is, we replace m with a plus 1. So m, take note, is the quantity a plus 1. That is m. Don't forget, may plus 1 pa. Okay? Next, replace m with a plus 1. So this m is the quantity a plus 1. That is m, and then may plus 7 pa. Simplifying, we now have this group, a plus 1 is equal to a plus 2. And then a plus 1 plus 7 is actually a plus 8. Therefore, we now have the final factors, which are a plus 2 times a plus 8. Now, this is just one way of solving this problem. Another way of solving or factoring this trinomial is we try and simply solve. Ito, check natin. What do you mean solve? Let's write a plus 1 quantity squared. Let me copy. And then plus 8 times a plus 1 plus 7. What you want to do is to expand a plus 1 quantity squared. Now, from our previous topics, a plus 1 quantity squared, it's just the square of a binomial. It's equal to what? A squared plus 1 times a is 1a. Double it, it's 2a. Plus 1 squared is 1. So this is the expanded form of that one. Plus, why not try to distribute 8 this time? So doing that, we now have 8a plus 8, and then finally, plus 7. What we do next is combine like terms. A squared plus. Take note, we have like terms here. We have 2a and 8a. Now, if we add them, it's 10a. Plus, we have another set of like terms here. We have the constants 1, 8, and 7. So combine them, 1 plus 8 is 9, plus 7 is 16. Notice we now have a trinomial with leading coefficient equal to 1. So we solve like ordinary solving. We write all the factors of 16. So let's write it here. Let's write them here. 1 times 16, negative 1 times negative 16, then 2 times 8, then negative 2 times negative 8. Then 4 times 4, negative 4, negative 4. Now, which among these factors would add up to the middle numerical coefficient 10? By observation, 2 plus 8 is equal to 10. Therefore, let's use them. So doing that, we now have a plus 2 times a plus 8. As you can see, they are the same with what we solved here previously. Our answer must be correct. But if I were you, I would try and use this first method kasi kahit na anong medyo mas complicated pa, if you know the key, which is the middle literal coefficient. In this case, the middle literal coefficient is a binomial a plus 1. You square it is equal to the first term, sort of, a plus 1 quantity squared, then you can always use this technique. Let's have some more exercises. Although medyo mas challenging ito, kaya yan, tiyagain nyo lang. You can pause this video now and work on them. Go! Here are the answers so you can check. Looking at the answer in number 5, take note that the final answer is x squared. Yes, it is already in factored form because x squared means the product of two values, x and x. Therefore, it's in factored form. And always also remember that the key is the middle literal coefficient. That is what we usually set as another variable. Be careful in number 5 though. Let x minus 1 be equal to m or another variable except the variable x. You cannot use let x minus 1 be equal to x. Here's the last set of questions. Numbers 8 and 9 are a little bit different. Go! Here are the answers so you can check.
You can go to the next video for part 4 of the tutorial series on factoring polynomials. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. Happy solving!